All right, welcome everybody. I am going to get this PowerPoint up and we'll get this show on the road because it's kind of a long PowerPoint we put together at the last minute today, and we're like, wow, we have a lot of stuff. Okay, everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm Jane Jewett. I run Willow Sedge Farm in Palisade, which is in Aiken County, Minnesota. And some of you may also know me as the Associate Director of the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture at the University of Minnesota. Kathy, you want to introduce yourself?
Kathy Zeman, Simple Harvest Farm Organics, Nurse Strand in Rice County, also with the Minnesota Farmers Market Association.
I'm Wayne Martin. I'm with University of Minnesota Extension, livestock production, and I tend to focus on smaller scale beginning farms, new immigrant community, pigs, poultry, sheep and goats.
All right. So the title of our project is Towards a Forever Green Poultry Ration. And I'm going to start out talking a little bit about the Forever Green initiative. So Forever Green is a University of Minnesota initiative. It's a bunch of researchers working in different departments within the College of Food, Agricultural, and Natural Resource Sciences at the U of M. And the goal of it is to maximize continuous living cover of agriculture while at the same time having a really high performing, efficient agriculture. So they're working on crop rotations, continuous living cover rotations, and perennial cropping systems and development of perennial crops. So those perennial crops and winter annual cover crops fit into continuous living cover systems, but the goal is to have them also generate marketable products, things that can enter market channels and be valuable to farmers. And our project title is Towards a Forever Green Ration. So these crops are still being developed. A couple of them, one of them at least, has been released and is available for farmers to grow, but it's still on small acreage, and some of the others are still in the pipeline of development. And so the crops themselves are not quite available yet. So what we did was put analogs for those crops into the rations that we tested so that we could see what those rations would look like and how they would act with chicken production, with the idea that eventually the feedstuffs that we used could be replaced by forever green crops. So for example, we used wheat in the forever green rations, and eventually that could be replaced by kernza, perennial grain, which that's been released, it's being grown, but like I said, pretty small acreage, like about 4,000 acres so far, which isn't much. But kernza is pretty cool because it has these tremendous root systems and it's a perennial, so they stay in the ground year round, holding soil in place, preventing soil erosion, enhancing water infiltration, and generally being really good for soil health. And it's a dual purpose crop. It can be grazed in the spring by livestock, which actually improves the grain yield in the fall. And then we used soybean oil in the rations for energy, and that could eventually be replaced by Camelina oil. So Camelina is a winter annual crop, can be planted after corn and grow over the fall, go dormant in the winter, flush up again in the spring and produce an oilseed crop. and then get harvested off in time to plant another crop after it. So that's called relay cropping. And that's also great for keeping the soil covered in the fall, winter, and spring when you have an annual row crop situation. And it flowers really early, so it's there for the beneficial insects when there's not much else flowering. And there are some other crops in the pipeline that are oil seeds that could replace soybean oil in the rations in the future. Perennial sunflower is one of those. And then Silphium integrifolium, or silflower, is also under development as a perennial oil seed. And then we used alfalfa in the rations. It's a high protein forage and typically fed to ruminants, cattle, sheep, and goats, but it can also be used as a protein source in rations for pigs or poultry. And it can partially replace soybean meal. It can't fully replace it because it doesn't have high enough protein content. Soy meal is pretty high at 44% crude protein, and alfalfa meal comes in at about 17%. But alfalfa is also a perennial crop that keeps those roots in the ground year round and also fixes nitrogen into the soil. See, we got a couple things in the chat. Kathy or Wayne, are there questions we need to answer?
No, Jane, I just put the link to the Forever Green website in there. And then Susan Beal reminded us that there will be restrictions, the amount of camelina that can be fed. So once we get enough and get to those rations, we'll have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, that's a good point, but I'd make the counterpoint that in these rations, we were using camelina oil, not camelina meal. So the camelina oil is basically the same as any other vegetable oil. Camelina meal would be a different story. Okay, so rations for the good growth of broiler chickens, generally you're looking at 18 to 22% protein, somewhere in that range, and about 1,550 kilocalories per pound of feed. And you may see kilocalories written as kcal per kilogram of feed, which, you know, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So then you're looking at about 3,400 kilocalories per kilogram. So a typical basic broiler ration, you're looking at corn for energy, soybean meal for protein, and a vitamin and mineral mix. Pretty simple. Corn, soybean, vitamins and minerals. For the Forever Green broiler ration, we took corn out of it entirely, and we tried to substitute in as much other stuff as we could for soybean meal. So it looked quite a bit different. We used wheat for energy and protein, but it doesn't have as much of either as corn or soybean. Alfalfa meal for protein, again, it's way lower than soybean meal. Vegetable oil for energy to replace some of that energy we're not getting from corn. And then we added some additional ingredients to bump up the energy and protein to make sure we could meet the broiler chicken requirements. And then of course that vitamin and mineral mix. So we worked with the Fertrell company with Jeff Maddox there. He did a suggested ration for us when we were trying to figure out what this could look like. And this was his suggested ration: wheat, roasted soybeans, that would be whole roasted soybeans, the alfalfa, the field peas, fish meal, fat in the form of soybean oil, and then calcium and enzymes and vitamins. So I wound up not using this exact ration. I didn't want to use fish and I didn't have access to field peas, so mine looked different, but Kathy Siemens actually looked really similar to that. And Kathy, do you want to talk through your rations here for a minute?
I will, and just ignore the phone ringing in the background. It's the landline. So I had Jeff ran this for us, and then we translated it to, because my rations are run by Cashton. And so Cashton put in, they had to substitute some things. And since I'm certified organic, we had to add a few more things in that the methionine I had to get in there. And I came in with fish meal to help my ration out. But you can see we took out all the corn and came back in with everything on the left-hand side. Jane, you want to go to the next one? So there we go.
Yep, so there, yeah, I just underlined to show that the suggested kind of standard ration would have all that corn in it, and you took it all out.
And so clearly if we can substitute corn, think of how much time the ground stays bare under corn. Even if you could get in cover crops with the corn, being able to take corn out of the ration and putting other grains in there besides that will keep the cover on the ground much longer during the year. Next.
Yep.
And I think
And
we
then
actually,
soybean.
yep. And we did actually get up to 46% soy, I think, at Cashton. And then there's my fish meal that helps out the rest of it. And this is, I'm sorry, I was looking at Lynn's comment as well in the chat. And so this is just the nutrient analysis and the breakdown of the exact recipe ration that Cashton ran for us. You could put flax in your ration. You're gonna have to limit that as well. You can't have, there'll be a limit, higher limit. And I mean, there will be other feeds you could put in. And for me, I'd have to have a certified organic source, and then I'd have to run the numbers on it to see, because I do have flax in all my hen layer feed, but not in my broiler feed.
And Kathy, as I remember, the issue with flax, with too much flax, is it can give a off flavor or a fishy flavor to the chicken.
And it can go rancid a little bit too if in the summer months.
It'll go rancid, yeah, or it can.
It can, yeah. And then we did notice in the 2 years, it just seemed that the forever green birds ate more feed. I mean, that's what I thought I was seeing. And then by the time we weighed it, at the end of at the end, we added everything up, they did eat more. And remember that poultry eats to their caloric intake need. And so we sent my forever green ration into Minnesota Valley to get a test on it. And next slide, Jane. Because we were wondering if it was really right. And we did find out that protein was right where it should have been, but it is a little bit low on energy. And if they do eat to their energy intake, then no wonder they ate more, because they have to meet their caloric intake need. Jane's recipe.
Okay. Yep, so here's the ration that I used, and I did not want to use fish meal. And so I went for a little bit of soybean meal, but then added some whole roasted soybeans to get both the fat content boosted up for energy and the protein content boosted up. And then Camelina oil, I did use some of that in 2019 because it was available from one of the research projects. And so that was just substituted in for, the soybean oil. Just took out the soybean oil, put in Camelina oil. That worked out just fine. And that was for a 1,500 kilocalories per pound, which was still a little bit less. It was difficult to get the energy high enough in these forever green rations without that big starchy package of corn in there. I think we actually could have gone a little higher on the oil. The ration still seemed a tad dusty to me, and I think oil could have been higher to boost that energy a little more. Wayne, there's yours.
So we participated in this project as well on the St. Paul campus. There is a student organic farm called Cornucopia, and we've been raising broilers on campus since about 2011. So just to have a conventional feed that was easy to access and get off the shelf, I bought Sprout, which I got at the local Fleet Farm store. And we've used this actually several summers, and it was 21% protein. And you can see that the lysine was a 0.9%, methionine 0.3, et cetera, et cetera. So a standard diet. This is produced by either Cargill or General Mills. I can't remember who, but or Purina. But anyway, just a standard feed off the shelf. So let's go to the next one. So this was our, in terms of nutritional content for the Forever Green diet, it was also a 21% crude protein. Crude fat was actually almost double what the fat had been in the Sprout diet. Also, lysine and methionine, which are both essential amino acids, they were both higher than what was in the Sprout diet as well. So anyway, that's it was overall a decent. We used for fat, we used Camelina oil. As you can see, we added 80 pounds to it. And as I remember, this was in 2019. The birds seemed to eat it okay. We didn't have issues with it in terms of storage or anything like that. So there was no issue with having that much Camelina oil in the ration. And then you can see we had a little bit of, otherwise it was the standard diet that we had established for the Forever Green ration, which was alfalfa meal and a little bit of soybean meal and then wheat instead of corn. Next one. So for us, we used Freedom Rangers. We've been using them for the last several years. They're fun to raise. We teach kids how to raise chickens on campus, and they have a lot more fun with these than they do the standard Cornish crossbirds. So we've been doing Freedom Rangers for quite a while. And as you can see,
and then Kathy and I just used the basic Cornish cross.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to run through our systems because we each had a different system. And for the statisticians in the group, we didn't do, exceptionally stringent experimental design here, but we treated each farm as a block, more or less. And so when we're going through data later, you can reasonably compare different batches of chickens from the same farm, but you can't really compare them between farms because we were each so different in how we did things. So I use pullets only of the Cornish cross, and I brood them in these little poly calf hutches, but I don't brood them in there. I don't keep them in the brooder exclusively for very long, depending on weather, but generally if it's summer and it's above about 50 degrees, I start letting them run out of the brooder as soon as I possibly can, sometimes even at 2 days old. And this photo on the right doesn't show it, but typically I have a little chicken wire run around there to keep the tiny birds close to the hut. And then I also cover over the top with bale wrap netting on posts to keep crows out of them, because crows, people have told me, oh, crows don't kill live birds. No, I have personally witnessed them killing my baby chicks because they're so small when I let them out. But I like letting them out early because then they learn how to run around and forage, and they're not the same boring bird that I hear other people complain about with Cornish. If I let them out early and they get used to running around and learn to forage when they're young, they keep it up, and they are pretty active throughout their 8-week lifespan. So these are old photos, by the way, because the photos I took of this actual project got lost when my phone died, but I still do things pretty much the same way. So these are chickens with a hut made out of cattle panels covered with a tarp, and that's where they live. Fence around them, and I do use electro netting pretty religiously to keep the skunks and raccoons out of them. But on the right, there's my cat just watching TV. He never killed a chick, but he sure loved to sit and watch them.
Jane, do you
So-
pull their feet at night?
I don't, no, I leave it out, but when they're real small, I'm locking them up at night so they don't have access to the feed at night. And typically when they're bigger, they're going in the hut and going to bed at night. And, you know, the feed is out there for them as soon as they get up and around in the morning. Okay, Wayne, you want to talk about the student farm?
Yeah, so on the St. Paul campus, there are, I think, 5.5 acres that are devoted to the student organic farm. And, but not all of it is certified at this point. I think only about 3.5 or 4 acres are actual certified organic. So we have 10 huts that we raise chickens in and move them on a daily basis. The chickens are actually started in there's a big poultry barn that is used for research and teaching. And we start the birds in there and then bring them out at 4 weeks of age and put them inside the huts. So our huts are 8 feet by 8 feet, and each one will hold about 30 birds very comfortably for the duration. We have been raising the birds and keeping the huts on fields of Dutch white clover. And Dutch white clover grows really thick, and it's hardy. It comes back well. And the birds like it. It's great for them to nibble on. So we move the huts forward every day, and they get to nibble on fresh clover. And we typically, in the past, we have raised up to 600 birds in the summertime. And again, we'll have 8 or 10 students who are all learning about raising birds. Most of them don't have any experience with chickens until they work on the farm. And we've had several students who are vegetarian and or vegan, and who have worked with them and were at first uncomfortable, and by the end of the summer felt that our birds were treated pretty well. So anyway, this is what a hut looks like. And actually, at this point, we've added wheels to them to help move them along because they're really heavily built. We used to use, and also they don't have chicken wire anymore. They also have out on the lower portion, all the way around the lower 4 feet, we have put hardware cloth, because we found that raccoons would reach through and pull out feathers, but also hawks would reach in and bite birds, and they would pull out flesh, and then we'd have to euthanize the bird. So with hardware cloth around them, they aren't able to do that. And again, we added wheels just to make them a little easier to move. And we used to use tarps, but we don't anymore because it seems like we are fairly frequently hit with strong straight line winds on campus. And so we end up having tarps get trashed. And so that's when we went to putting on vinyl siding on the huts. And it takes more time and effort to get them get that done. But once it's done, they're on there for a long time. All of those huts have lasted 5 or 6 years or more without any kind of replacement.
Great. Any questions for Wayne about the system on campus?
Nothing in the chat.
Okay,
But
then
Wayne,
Kathy.
let's ask you that same question. Do you pull feed at night when they first start out?
We don't. No.
Okay. Right.
Well, when they first start out, they're inside the poultry barn, and of course, in really nice heated rooms, and the lights have a timer on them. So the lights go off at 10 o'clock or 10:30 at night.
Right.
Okay, Kathy.
All right. So this is my operation. It's all highly erodible land, so it's all in grass. So we graze everything, including our poultry. We set up our brooders in our predator-proof poultry pen the day before the chicks arrive, and it is predator-proof. We've learned we had to do that. So we clean and sanitize all the feeders and waters. The heat lamps go up so that the shavings underneath the brooders are warm, and that air below it's warm. The brooders are kind of fashioned after the Ohio style, but I've made many modifications to them. And then the pens are roughly 7 by 7, and then they just expand as the chicks grow until they head out to pasture at the start of week 4. So day 1 of week 4, they're supposed to hit the pasture. You know, but if it's really cold or windy, I don't want to do it. So then I let them go a couple extra days. And typical, you know, day 1, 1-day-old chicks arrive at the post office on the early truck. I drive 3 miles into town, pick them up and come home. Much different than Jane up in northern Minnesota. She's got a little bit longer drive usually for all of her stuff in northern Minnesota. But since we're certified organic, as long as they come in on day 1, they qualify as organic. We start them out pretty religiously, a gallon of water, a cup of certified organic sugar. We dissolve that, a tablespoon of certified organic apple cider vinegar, and then free choice feed. And we start grit. Oh, I think that's on the next slide. So our feeding protocol, we do free choice feed for the entire 7 to 8 weeks. We don't remove feed at night. You know, when you farm on your own, I did my potential feed cost versus labor cost. And I figured out that it cost me just as much to do everything twice as that potential feed cost. We don't do it. I do start, we start them out on number 1 cherry grit right away at week 2, and then they moved number 2 cherry grit for all the time they're on pasture. And that's a picture of my Forever Green ration on the left, and the regular ration is on the right. That's just the difference in look between the 2 rations that you saw earlier. And one of the reasons that we don't remove feed at night, you know, usually they kind of, if you watch them at night, it's dark, even though we have a heat lamp in there, in our pen. We used to pull it, but then when they're starving, when you put that feed in, and I never liked that, the fact that we were doing that big difference in their digestive system. You feed full, and then you starve them at night, and then they come in and they practically kill each other trying to get to the feed pans. And so we just don't do it anymore, and we've not seen any issues. In our system, we don't run into those typical leg problems that you always hear about with Cornish rock. Maybe it's because we do the raw 708s coming out of whelp, don't know, but this system seems to work for us. So our hoop is it's an 8 by 12 foot base. We do a 2 by 6 and an L shape on the base, 3, 16-foot cattle panels. We do the same thing as Wayne learned. We put the hardware cloth on that bottom 2 feet. Otherwise, raccoons are brutal. And then we do one 12-foot long 2 by 4 on edge at the center top, and we hang the 2 feeders and the grit. So you got about 150 pounds usually hanging, holding that down. We do a 12 by 16 tarp. There's 7-gallon waters on raised bases in the corners. We typically throw in, our apple cider vinegar in the waters as we need to. I hang it from the top so that it's there. We'll put 35 birds optimum in there. If I put more in, then I have to push it daily. So I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to do that. And my system allows me, if I get caught on time, if something happens, they'll have enough water and feed to go 36 hours instead of just 24. And if you notice in the front here, it's brown. That's where I just moved them from, and they're moving on to the green grass. And within about 2 weeks, this brown will be all greened up and back into green grass. So this is, for me, it's the best compromise I can do. I have 0 predators. They're on new grass daily. And then I don't have to push them in at dusk, and I don't have to let them out at dawn. They're just always out there. And all I've got to do is keep that feed and water going. Let's see if that'll work, Jane. It should play. And if the sound would work, you'll hear a really noisy sound. It's my skid loader. So when these pins were first put out, I don't know how many decades ago, everybody complained about pulling the pins and killing birds, right? You'd run them over. Well, I have a skid loader. She does all the work on my farm for me. So I don't pull anything, I push. And that noise, right? There's noisy there. And those birds just run in front of me. So I never run over anybody. And I do kind of scare them a little bit. And so to date, knock on wood, I know I'm a little paranoid saying this out loud, but we've not run into green mussel here at all. So that's that. And if you keep going there, you'll find other annoying videos from Simple Harvest, but you can come back to the screen, Jane. Okay. Any questions then for Simple Harvest?
It was a little hard to hear you, Kathy, when you were talking through the video there. So if you want to just describe again what we were seeing there.
Yeah. Okay. So I didn't know the video played. I couldn't hear any sound on my end. So people, when those hoops first came out, or the chicken tractors came out, everybody pulls them. And then the complaint was, well, we run over birds every once in a while. Well, yeah, because you're in front and you're making the noise and you're the weird thing. So your birds are going to the back, and that's where you're pulling from. So I push. The skid loader does a lot of work on my farm, and we just push, and that noise makes them run in front of me. I always see them. We've never run over a bird in, a quarter of a century doing this. And the other thing that I think helps, we've not yet, knock on wood, I'm a little paranoid saying this, we've not yet had green mussel syndrome at our farm. And I think it's because we make those birds move, multiple times a day, and we make them flap their wings. And that should help develop that breast muscle and not make that tear happen. I have no data on that. It seems to work on that way on our place. Back to you, Jane.
Okay, bird performance and economics. Here's where you get to look at lots and lots and lots of tables of data. There we go. Okay, so here's the rundown on how birds performed on my farm in 2019. We did this in 2019. We paused it in 2020 because of COVID, and then Kathy and I did it again in 2021. The student organic farm on campus was still paused in 2021. So the only data from there is from 2019. But here we go. I get a batch of 152 chicks at a time. So that's my starting number. And I have my birds on starter crumbles for 2 to 3 weeks before I put them on regular rations. So, I got them 22nd of May. They didn't go on the Forever Green and standard rations until the 11th of June. The average weight per bird for the Forever Green ration in 2019 looked pretty small compared to the standard ration. I'll be showing some pictures later of what the ration looked like. And part of the problem in 2019 was that the grind on the Forever Green ration was just too coarse. There were a lot of whole wheat kernels left in there, or half wheat kernels, and even having the chicks on starter crumbles for a couple weeks to start with, they just weren't quite ready to handle those coarse wheat kernels when they went on them. So that hurt performance of the Forever
Jane,
Green ration in 2020.
is that carcass weight or live weight?
That's carcass weight.
Okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't quite that bad. Yeah, it wasn't that great. Okay, so here's the economics with that first batch. They went through a lot of food, and we didn't do intensive measuring of what they wasted versus what they ate. So some of that could have been waste of picking through the coarser stuff and leaving it. But looking over here at batch 2, which was later in the season, and looking down at the cost of the feed as the percentage of the sale price of the chicken, they were pretty equivalent there. And that's because the Forever Green ration was actually a fair bit cheaper than the standard ration in that second half of 2019. Corn prices had spiked up a little high. So, okay. And then I put together these histograms. So this shows the range of weights in those birds in the Forever Green ration. And that's batch 1 with the kind of pitiful performance. But even with that coarse feed, some of the birds did okay on it. Some of them came in at 4.5 to 5 pounds, 4 pounds. So what that tells me is that there's enough genetic variation still after all the breeding to make broilers uniform. There's still enough there that, there could be some breeding work to get a bird that actually does well on the Forever Green ration. And there's the standard batch, the histogram of spread of weights for that batch. There were also some birds that didn't do very well in that batch in the spring of 2019, which was pretty cold and wet. Probably nobody remembers because so much has happened since then, but it wasn't a nice spring. So 2021, I had a finer grind on the ration, and that did help. You can see that I got an average bird weight in the 4.5 to 5 pound range in both batches with the Forever Green ration, and 5.5 to 6 pounds on the standard ration. So still a little smaller on the Forever Green birds, but quite a bit more respectable than the first go round in 2019. So here, again, the birds went through a lot of feed with that Forever Green ration in the spring. And like Kathy mentioned, with the lower energy level of that ration, I think that may have been the issue there. Cooler weather in that time frame for the first batch, and they were just eating a lot of feed to try to meet their energy needs. But the second batch later in the summer, when it was warmer, the standard birds actually went through more feed than the Forever Green ones, and the price differential there, the Forever Green ration was more expensive at that point, just because of rises and falls in the prices of commodities. So the feed cost on the Forever Green ration was a higher percentage than standard, but if corn prices had been a little higher, they may have been even there. So there's a lot of factors that feed into whether something performs economically. It's not just the performance of the birds, it's not just the price of the feed, it's those two things interacting with each other. And there's the histogram for the 2021 Forever Green birds. Again, there's diversity of response there, and there are some birds that made it all the way up to 6.5 pounds on that Forever Green ration. So there's some diversity of genetics to work with there if someone was interested in trying to breed a bird that could do well on Forever Green ration. And there's the standard. And actually, I think those over 7 pound ones were probably cockerels that got into the batch of pullets due to missexing at the hatchery. I don't think those were pullets. So, okay, a bunch of questions in the chat.
Jane, it was a side conversation on green mussel.
Yeah, okay.
So we'll keep,
that's
we'll keep that in the chat because that'll be good to share.
Yep. Okay, so that's the rundown on economics for my birds. And then Wayne, you want to talk about the student organic farm birds a little bit?
Yes. So first of all, I only had one batch of birds that was able to participate in the in this whole series of field trials, because in the summer of 2019, our first batch of birds were delivered to the processing plant, and they got mixed up at the plant. And so the control group, we and the Forever Green, the group, all got mixed together. And so there was no way we couldn't tell anything from the data. So that group we just had to throw out. Then in 2021, we didn't have students working on the student farm, so we didn't have birds. So I have just this one group of birds to report on from our effort to participate in this. So we had 200 birds total, 100 birds, 102 in each group, and we split those up into the 5. We have 5 huts each for the birds, or 4 huts most likely. Can't remember at this point. We lost a few birds, but not many, and at least some of those birds were lost to predators. Once they get out, we have hawks on campus and coyotes as well. So for the Forever Green ration, this is Carcass Weight. Again, these were Freedom Rangers, so they grow a little slower. But for the Forever Green ration, they at 63 days or 9 weeks, they averaged 3.58 pounds. Whereas for the standard ration, this is more typical. They averaged 4.3 pounds. And so you can see that's almost, not quite a pound difference. I guess that is 0.7 of a pound difference per bird average.
And Wayne, is that normally how many days you hold them on feed, or is that a shorter period of time?
That was a shorter period of time. Normally we take the Freedom Rangers to 11 weeks.
Got it.
But we were also trying to meet the requirements of the people that buy our birds, the campus club. They were wanting smaller birds. So we took them in a little earlier than normal. Let's see, so in terms of looking at this, for dressed weight, on a batch basis, it was 612 pounds of feed used for the Forever Green ration per pound of carcass, versus 4.86 pounds of feed used for the standard ration. Now, both of those numbers are going to be higher just simply because we're growing Freedom Rangers, and they just take longer to go to market. And so that's more feed than you would use for a Cornish cross by quite a bit. You can see that our feed cost per pound of meat is pretty high as well. And then the birds ate a total of For example, 21, almost 22 pounds of feed of the Forever Green ration versus 20.9. So that's an intriguing number because on the one hand, the total amount of feed consumed is almost similar, and yet the birds on the standard ration did better. So they were just able to convert feed into meat better than on the Forever Green ration for whatever reason. And then you can see our feed cost as a percent of dollars of sales. It's really high. It's 56% for the Forever Green ration versus 30% for the standard ration. So anyway, it's obviously there are things to work on yet, at least from our experience on the student farm, and regarding feeding an alternative feed to the Freedom Rangers.
Yeah, and Wayne, you and I talked a little bit before we started this webinar about your really high feed cost for that Forever Green ration, which,
oh yes,
you know, it was a lot higher than what Kathy or I encountered for our Forever Green ration, and you know, it just kind of points out the importance of shopping around a little for your feed. I guess the source you were using just happened to be really high.
Yeah, it was the closest feed dealer that could actually do it, and he was just really high. So we went with it anyway. But yeah, that was a lot, and that's got to be a real consideration when you're shopping around for feed substitutes. Is, you know, what's it going to cost?
Mm-hmm. Okay, Kathy.
Jane, let's take Jack's question. Was the dollar per pound on the meat value the same for all in the calculations? What was used? Jack, unmute. Tell us what you mean by that. I'm not sure I understand that question.
Sorry, what I mean by that is that if you look at that high cost percentage of feed on the Red Rangers, if you charge $1 per pound for them and $10 a pound for yours, Kathy, then the percent of the feed cost in terms of value of the bird is going to be dramatically different based on just the value you assign to that bird. And so what is the dollar value of that meat that you're associating? If everybody had the same dollar value meat, then the fluctuation in feeds is equivalent. But if you sell your bird for $5 and someone else sells for $7, or if Campus Club's only paying $3, that's going to affect that percentage that you have at the bottom there. And of course, Red Rangers end up selling for a higher value in the normal market too. So because of the more feed they use. So that was the question of how comparable are those percentages between the different groups? Are they not comparable at all because you're looking at different retail value that was created from the meat?
Yeah, that's a good point. And you really can't compare between farms because we were each charging different amounts per pound for the birds. And
I get $4.30 a pound from on campus from our birds.
And actually that line is on one of the rows that we deleted. So Wayne, you're at 430. I was at 405, and I think Jane's at 355, if I remember right.
Yeah, I'm at 355 because I'm not organic, and I'm a long ways from the metro area, so my pricing's a little lower. So yeah, again, you know, you really need to look at the comparison between the Forever Green and the standard ration within each farm and not try to compare so much from farm to farm. Kathy was using organic feed. I was not, Wayne was not, and we were all charging different amounts for the birds. So each farm is kind of a block.
Oh, this is mine. Thanks, Jane. So is it? Oh, next slide, please.
You want to go to the next slide, Kathy? Yes.
Right,
okay,
Wayne,
'cause
are
I
you
was
finished?
down.
So actually, though, Susan had a comment, though, those sale
Oh.
prices make this math worse.
I guess in what way? I
Right.
mean, we're looking within each farm, and so within each farm, the Forever Green and the standard ration are being sold for the same amount. It's just between farms there are differences. Susan, do you want to unmute and discuss that point a little more?
I don't have all the numbers in front, but it would seem to me that if Wayne's birds, even with the pricier feed and the higher price meat, he was still up at those percentage feed cost as percentage of bird sales, his numbers would almost be worse. And
Right.
I appreciate you can't compare farm to farm, but I'm thinking about in my mind if there's actually a way that you could normalize the feed costs and the sales prices and the birds. And I can't do that without paper in front of me. So, but I would think that conversion, Wayne, would almost make your conversion worse, right? Your
Oh,
sales
yeah.
price.
I would agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and then Susan, to your other question, whether we actually did feed analyses or were the values calculated, Kathy did actually do a feed analysis. I'm working on it. I've got samples ready to ship and haven't got it done yet, but and then like for Wayne with the sprout, the standard ration, those are guaranteed analysis from the company. So we know that's accurate. And then the others were calculated.
Thanks.
Kathy, take it away.
There you go. So on my farm in 2019, which does seem 100 years ago, brought in, there's my first batch in May, and then my second batch came in August. Split them into two groups. I ran them on the same ration from day one all the way through. The total weight of the birds, these birds grew really, really, really well. Even for me, this was bigger than I typically would run them. So the average weight was 609, 657 in batch one, 676 on the Forever Green ration in August, and then 632 on the standard. They just grew really well. I think I'm fairly certain this is the year that I did lose, right towards the end, I lost. Oh, I'm sorry. The butcher date, I've got 2 dates there on the batch 2 because we had to do a taste test. And my butchering plant is custom exempt. And so we can't do a taste test on custom exempt meat. So I had to take some of them to KB Poultry to make sure they ran through an inspected meat plant. And that's why I have 2 different butchering dates there, 2 different batches, but we figured the math out evenly. And so mine were on feed 61 days or 60 days. Again, my Forever Green ate more feed in all my batches. They just ate more feed. The value of our feed is there. I'm certified organic. It's a little bit expensive. So I ran 444, 496, 442, 420. There's my total dressed weight. There's my average for both batches. So in my case, the number of pounds per pounds of total dressed weight, 288, 278, 268, 267. That second batch in 2019 was really close. There's my dollar value per pound of dressed weight. I fed, really close to 17, 18 pounds of feed per bird. My feed runs me, $5, $6 a pound. And then that's my total, my feed cost as a percent of my dollar sales in that 20 to 20% range.
Yeah,
That
so
was
those numbers were really close. I mean, impressively close. And I think if we had done real statistics on this, they would have not been significantly different between the rations.
And I forgot, I think I was saying this is the year that I lost, we had a heat index of 126 and I lost 7 big birds off my standard ration, not off my Forever Green ration. I don't know, they just couldn't handle the heat as well. That was a hot day.
Okay.
And then in 2021, I brought in smaller birds only because of my rotation in my hoops. So it worked out well for me. So we brought in smaller numbers. They fit the hoops better. Lost a couple. This was a weird batch. The second batch in year 2021, I swear there were 3 birds in there that were not the same species. They were so tiny. It took them forever to grow out. So I ended up removing them from the group. That's why you see in the July batch, there's a difference of 38 when we began and 34 and 37 and 33. 4 of those birds I pulled out because they just were so tiny. They were nowhere near ready to be butchered. And then they finally grew out fine, but it took them forever. Total weight on the birds, they're 205. Standard was 177, the Forever Green 185, standard 153. My average weight per bird was smaller. I do not need 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 pound birds. My customers do like bigger birds, but even for my customers, they were pretty big in 2019. So, and then days on feed, for some reason, I had a shorter rotation in 2021. So, and I'm sure like everyone else, you take the dates that you can get. And so we went a week shorter in 21. And here are the economics. So again, they ate more feed on that Forever Green ration. There's the value of the feed. It was a little bit more expensive. The Forever Green ration was more expensive in both batches. The Forever Green birds gained more weight. Their average dress per bird was higher. Again, it's pretty consistent in my batches straight across. It's just, it was, my feed costs were a little bit higher in 2021. Any questions or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Susan Beal had a comment that the feed conversion was decent and close and may indeed reflect the organic feed source too. And that's entirely possible that, you've got a really good feed source and they were making those rations pretty consistent with each other.
I will also tell you that after my first batch in 2021, so the second batch in 2019, and then all of my both batches in 2021, I did a better job of weighing the feed. In my first batch in 2019, I knew what I ordered in and then just subtracted what I didn't feed, which I realized was not a really good way to do it because how do I know what they really delivered, right? So in the other 3 batches, I literally weighed every pail that we fed. So I have much more confidence in the numbers in the second batch in 2019 and then these 21 batches. Oh. Good point, Lynn. Lynn thinks that maybe the non-organic wheat probably contained glyphosate that might have inhibited growth in the non-organic feed.
Possible. Yeah, Wayne and I don't know the source of the wheat we used in the rations, so it's a possibility. Okay, so observations and lessons learned. So here's a picture of that 2-course feed that I had in 2019. And, you know, there's a lot of unbroken wheat kernels in there, just partially broken wheat kernels. It was way too coarse for the little birds when I put them on it after, you know, 2.5 weeks on crumbles. Even pouring the grit to them, they just never quite made it on that. And here's the comparison of that coarse wheat-based feed to the finer ground corn and soybeans. So that was definitely a confounding factor with my bird performance in 2019. And then in 2021, I got a different feed mill working on this and had a much finer grind on that Forever Green ration. It was pretty similar in texture to the corn and bean ration, and that also contributed to things going a lot better for the Forever Green birds in 2021. And here, just for general interest, is a photo comparing that coarse wheat ration to the Kernza grain. Kernza grain is on the left. And so that's what that grain looks like. And you can see the kernels of it are slimmer than wheat kernels. So unfortunately, we weren't able to get enough Kernza grain to actually test that in a ration with birds. We were hoping to be able to pull out like a small, you know, maybe 6 or 10 bird subset and feed them on Kernza and see what happened, but we weren't able to secure enough Kernza to do that. So that's a project for another time. So observations and lessons learned, and here are some of mine, and Wayne and Kathy might want to chime in with theirs too, but I did notice that the second batches did better. Those were starting in August and going through October, mid-October, early October, and things were just drier and warmer. The chickens consume more ration in the early part of the year, probably because the energy content wasn't quite high enough and it was cooler and they needed more of it to keep their body temperature. So, you know, if I do this again, if I start using that ration regularly, I might want to bump up that energy content, at least in the spring. Okay, taste testing. So in 2019, Beth Dooley, who's an experienced chef, very well known in the Twin Cities area, she performed taste testing on the University of Minnesota campus for the agronomy department. And Helene Murray joined this call. She's with Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture. She's our executive director. And she arranged for Beth to work with us on this. So thanks a lot, Helene, because it turned out pretty neat. So that was set up with Wayne's birds being tested on one day and Kathy's on another day and mine on a third day. So there weren't necessarily the same people doing each tasting. So again, you can't compare between farms, but you can compare birds within farms. So here's what folks thought about which type was the best. There were a few people who liked the Forever Green birds the best on each date, but there were more people who preferred the standard ration. And then we also had store-bought like Golden Plump chickens alongside to test that. And so, you know, part of it clearly is what people are used to eating and what their palate is trained to. And so there were definitely people who preferred the store-bought chicken. And if you subtract out the numbers there are also some who could not detect a difference. So then for 2021, I gave some pairs of chickens to some of my regular customers and told them to have a party and cook both chickens the same night, the same way, and have them on separate platters and have their friends come over and do the taste testing. So that wound up being kind of fun. People had a good time with that. Here's the survey that I asked folks to hand out to their friends, and it's pretty similar to the one that was used in the 2019 taste testing. We were looking at characteristics like flavor, tenderness, texture, and juiciness. And so for the first party, there were a couple people who preferred Forever Green. Most of them couldn't detect a difference. The age ranges there are kind of interesting, I think. The older folks, if they had a preference, it was for the Forever Green chickens. And then for the kind of middle-aged folks, 35 to 49, you know, most of them preferred more of them preferred the standard to the Forever Green. But again, there wasn't a lot of difference. And then in this group, we had some youngsters in there under 18, and nobody in that group preferred the Forever Green if they could detect any difference at all. But overall, there just wasn't a lot of difference. People said, you know, they weren't real different. One of the hosts of those dinner parties did tell me that he guessed which one was the Forever Green bird because it had just a hint of a wild game taste to it. He's a hunter and was really familiar with the different flavor of wild game compared to domestic meat. And so that kind of makes sense, I think, if you think about a bird that's eating more of a diet that's maybe a little bit closer to a wild forage diet than the typical corn and soybean ration. So some conclusions. Breeding work could produce a bird that would do really well on Forever Green rations. I think that could certainly be a route. Consumer attributes were not very different. There were people who could detect differences when things were side by side, but if you know, if they were just eating a Forever Green bird without also trying the standard one at the same time, they probably wouldn't notice differences. The feed texture is really important. Finer grind is better, especially when you've got, you know, hard seeded feed stuff like wheat. And then the economics of the Forever Green ration can work. It works out pretty decent in the organic system like Kathy's. And even in my system, it can work if the corn price is high and the Forever Green ration price is lower than a corn-based ration, even if the birds are not finishing out quite as heavy and eating a little bit more. So it's all that kind of balance of bird weight and feed price.
So Jane, we have a couple of comments here. Susan, do you want to unmute and talk us through your John Fagan and his crew at HRI?
I was just wondering, there was a little chat in the chat earlier about maybe the glyphosate making a difference. So if you guys have still got feed left and or meat left, it wouldn't take that much to add a glyphosate and AMPA testing to your analyses, and that could be revealing. And John Fagan and the guys at HRI Lab can do that. And then my other question was, did you do nutritional analysis on the actual meat that you've got? Because what we're starting to see, and we've had the opportunity to do this with some poultry products, and John's also doing it with beef and some other products that have been raised in different ways, either grass-fed versus a grain-fed, or different feeding strategies in poultry, or pastured poultry versus confinement poultry. And he does, instead of just doing a regular, more conventional type nutritional analysis, he's actually got an amazing spectrophotometer that he can look at. They run the product through, and they can look at, identify anything that's in there. So they can look at whatever trees and understory and whatever might be growing in the forest, instead of saying, I'm going to just count pine trees and maple trees and stuff. And what they've been looking for is to see if they can actually find markers that can differentiate products, or that might be able to be used to say, hey, look, like this is present in the forever green birds, but it's not present in the commercial fed birds. And that could be really interesting for a lot of reasons, like my perverse desire to know least among them, but it could be really interesting, and it could also give you a marketing advantage potentially, that might negate some of the other potential disadvantages of this.
Jane, I think do we have money left in the grant? I could send, Susan, what do we do? Send a,
If you got meat, don't throw it out or sell it or eat it for Sunday dinner yet. And I'll get with John and see if he's able to do that. And then I'll circle back with Wayne about it.
perfect.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it would be fantastically interesting, and it's a shame we didn't know about that possibility when we were writing the grant. I mean, the grant term is up tomorrow. We're slipping in this webinar as one of our deliverables at the very, very last minute. So
it might not work. I mean, it could be a really good thing to put in, if you've got like follow-up grant to do, or there's because I don't know who funded it, but like the next chapter, taking this to the next iteration kind of thing that happens sometimes in those funding opportunities.
Yeah, and I see Helene asked, is there a chance to write another grant to do another study based on what you've learned this time? Potentially, yes. This was funded by a Minnesota Department of Agriculture Sustainable Ag Demonstration Grant.
Mm-hmm.
And, because it's a demonstration grant and not research, that's why we were just kind of doing show and tell rather than doing heavy duty statistics on what we've got.
It would be a good SARE grant, and I'm still sort of noodling around to see if there's any farmer groups that might be interested in doing that as a SARE grant, and also noodling around to just even look if there's any industry people, like pasture poultry industry people that might be interested in doing it as well.
Yeah, actually, the Kernza Growers Group that's forming might be interested in doing it, because there is starting to be a little bit more acreage of Kernza planted, and there's now a cooperative, or I don't know if it's a formal cooperative, but there's a Kernza Growers Group that's working together.
That's interesting, because John's been doing, he's got 13 or 15 different grain products that they've been running through this same analysis, looking at the differences in agronomic practices and nutritional stuff in this way, with a bunch of stuff. And I can't remember if he's done Kernza. We talked about it, and I'm getting him some sources to do Emmers and einkorns and some of the heritage grains in addition. So anyway.
And I'm looking at the clock and want to be respectful of time, but Susan, you did say, did you do a physical examination on these birds to see if their hide, shank, standard, gloss, etc. were the same? Would we have, I don't remember, nothing jumped out at us except those weird birds that didn't grow well in 2021, that handful. Would we have noticed it, or would you have really had to look for it?
The birds that I've looked at over the years in different feeding trials, we've done soy, non-soy feeding trials, we've done GMO, non-GMO feeding trials, those sorts of things. And you can often see a difference in quality of the luster on the feather and the color of the shank, in the same types of birds. I mean, we'll see it different between different strains of birds, but yeah, those were pretty interesting if you just think to look. And I've seen it in small ruminants too on feeding trials, so might be interesting. Just
we'll have to write another grant.
Always.
Yeah. Always. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
we'll
I think that would
do these
be
and remember what we
really,
should have done. Yeah.
Yeah, but it sounds like it could really be extremely interesting to pursue that kind of analysis. All right, everybody, it is 7:46. We brought her home on time. Thank you all for joining us. This was recorded and we will have the recording available as soon as I can get it into YouTube and trim off the ends a little bit. And thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Jane, for your leadership on this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jane, for taking the initiative.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Yep, thanks everybody
Super.
for joining
Thanks for doing
us.
this.